Greetings, Hamptonians and guests. Thank you guys all for joining us tonight for our Get Out the Vote voter mobilization seminar. I'm super excited to be a part of this as the NHAA president. My name is Gena Pemberton. I'd like to thank our amazing panelists who are fellow alum. We have Lani Shaw from the class of 2002, Stacy Lynch, the class of 1998, Yvonne Saxon, the class of 1985, and Kendra Brown, class of '02. Thank you, all of you all, for being a part of this event. The power of Hamptonians as a collective is fierce. And that's why we felt like this was really important to take this opportunity to bring people together to understand that, voting and mobilizing your family is most important right now, as this is probably the most important election of our lifetime. And regardless of your political affiliation, let's celebrate the fact that we have a fellow HBCU grad on the ballot. And there's nothing more exciting than that. So please make sure your voice is heard, and that you vote, and then you have all of your family and friends to vote. I'm going to thank you all for being here right now today to hear from these phenomenal Hamptonians that are giving their time this evening to talk to us. So I'm going to pass it over to Lani Shaw, who is also the vice president of the NHAA, so she can get this party started. Thanks, Lani. Thanks, Lani.
Thank you, President Pemberton. Good evening. My name is Lani Shaw, and as an attorney and as the first vice president for the National Hampton Alumni Association, I'm very excited to host tonight's panel. We are excited to have an opportunity to talk about getting out the vote and voter mobilization tactics. Voting is such an important topic, and I feel that we have a duty and a responsibility to share information and strategies for increasing voter turnout. We have three dynamic Hamptonians that will serve as our panelists tonight, and we are in for a treat. I know that they have come prepared to share tips and strategies. So without further ado, I want to just go ahead and briefly introduce them to you. Our first panelist is Kendra Brown, also my classmate. Kendra is the Director of Public Policy for Mastercard. She previously served as the Chief of Staff for Representative G.K. Butterfield in the United States Congress. Most recently, she was the Senior Director for Diversity, Inclusion, and Affinity for the Washington College of Law at American University, where she led the law school's diversity and inclusion initiatives. Kendra is a 2002 graduate of Hampton University, and among other degrees, she received her law degree from Vermont Law School. Please join me in welcoming Kendra. Our second panelist is Stacy Renee Lynch. As the Deputy Director at the Mayor's Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, Stacy manages First Lady Chirlane McCray's public affairs and the Mayor's interaction with government agencies and key community stakeholders like the NAACP, the New York Urban League, the Asian American Federation, the Black Institute, the National Action Network, and the Rainbow Push Coalition. Stacy is a graduate of Hampton University and Quinnipiac Law School. Thank you for joining us, Stacy.
Happy to be here.
Our third panelist is Yvonne Saxon. Yvonne is a native of Mobile, Alabama, and a 1985 graduate of Hampton University and a 1988 graduate of the University of Alabama School of Law. Attorney Saxon is employed by the Alabama Attorney General's Office as an Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Appeals Division and serves as the General Counsel for the Alabama Board of Examiners for Speech Language Pathology and Audiology. We are excited to have Yvonne, who serves as a Vice President for the Eastern Region for NHAA Inc., to join us tonight. Welcome, Yvonne.
Glad to be here.
As you can see, we have a dynamic group of panelists for tonight's seminar. They represent various areas of the country, with Stacy in New York, Kendra in Maryland, and Yvonne in Alabama. I know that they are prepared to provide tips and strategies for getting out the vote and increasing voter turnout. Our first question tonight will be one for each of the panelists to answer. We will start with Kendra, and the question is, why is voting critical?
Voting is critical, and thank you for having me as a part of the panel discussion this evening. Voting is critical because it is the means by which our voices are heard. There's so much that is at stake, and we want to ensure everyone has a plan to vote. I know that we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but voting is so critical because it will determine who your representatives are at the federal, state, local level. It's not only about a presidential election. There are so many other electeds that are on the ballot, city councilmen, right? We have school board officials, we have judges. So there are so many different races that are on the ballot. And these are the individuals who you elect to represent you. So it is critically important. There are many who fought hard to ensure that we had the right to vote. So we cannot forsake that.
Thank you, Kendra. We will next move to Stacy.
So I'm going to add to what Kendra just said, and excuse me, I feel like I'm at home. This is my home by the sea, and so I'm going to be brutally honest with folks, and I'm going to take a little privilege in my responses tonight because the president of the association is my dear friend Gena Pemberton. So I want to make sure I represent her well. Let me start by saying that historically, Black Americans have just fought for their right to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed, roughly 55 years ago. We continue to fight for voting rights. This current administration, to a certain degree, has eliminated a lot of the policy and the structure that empowered Black Americans. So, to answer your original question, Lani, the reason why it's critical to vote is that most of our parents and grandparents literally just had the ability to vote, right? And it's critical as the next generation to fight for that right to vote. And the way you do that is by going out to vote for people that are like-minded like you, support the policies that are important to you, particularly Hamptonians. Most of us are, Black Americans from the South or the Caribbean. And if you don't vote, you lose some of the rights that empower you as a citizen of the United States. So I just want to reiterate, historically, it's important to vote just because of what our parents and our grandparents fought for.
And Yvonne?
Good evening, Lani, and again, thank you for inviting me to be part of the panelists tonight. And I would like to echo the sentiments that both Kendra and Stacy expressed, and add to that voting has consequences. When we don't vote, we see what happens, and that your vote, one vote, impacts the way all levels of government, as Kendra pointed out earlier. But it's so important that we vote because we have two parts going on. You have action and then you have voting. So the voting actually solidifies all those actions and the protests and everything else that we are trying to do. You need both to actually make our government work properly and to properly represent our interests. So when we don't vote, we lose our voice. Voting is our voice to make change. So if you're unhappy with something, you don't have to sit by and just let it happen that way. This is a democracy that we live in. We have a right to vote, and you have a right to make changes and to affect the changes that you want to see. When you sit out and you don't vote, then you get certain results. Right now, we're in the fight for the Supreme Court. We got so many things are on the ballot. So when you go in there, it's not just the people you're voting for. You're voting for your family. You're voting for one vote on November the 3rd. Is not just for 4 years. You're talking about a generation of lifetime that we are trying to affect with just one vote on that day. we are, as Kendra just pointed out, we see all of the changes that happen with what happened with the vote or no vote in 2016. You know, so many things are rolling back. And if you indeed want to have a say so, whether you like things one day one way or the other, your chance to have a voice in it is simply to vote. Thank you.
So each of our panelists has taken an opportunity to tell us why voting is important. One of the things that we hear often is about GoTV or Get Out the Vote and voter mobilization. So I want them to briefly sort of describe what those terms mean and sort of how we put them into practice. So we will start with Yvonne this time.
Okay. When we think about GOTV, it means just that get out the vote. And, there's so many ways in which you get out the vote. We think about there's a theme this year about the season of voting. So people can embrace the whole concept that we don't vote on one day. We have one day that's designated nationally, but we have a season of voting. And that a part of this season is about learning how to plan your vote. And so when we start talking about get out the vote, it all matters where you live. Depends on where you live, has a lot to do with how the push is going. I live in Alabama where we do have early voting through what's called absentee voting. And so now this year, it's been a big push to get people to go to the election office and place your vote early and in person because of COVID and other matters. So getting out that vote is just a process of us helping people get to the polls, providing different mechanisms if people need assistance. You do that through different organizations, as we'll discuss a little bit later. But in terms of that, it's all about how do you actually get those people who registered.
Yeah.
Okay, it's one thing to register. Okay, it's a whole nother thing to vote. You can be registered, but that's just one part of it. It's kind of like getting your learner's permit and never getting your driver's license. You don't really get control of the wheel until you get your driver's license. So you don't really get to control or say what's happening until you actually go to the polls and vote.
Thank you, Yvonne. We will now move to Kendra for that same question.
Yes, and I agree with Yvonne. It is about ensuring that everyone is out there, makes their plan, ensures that they understand their own jurisdiction. So what the logistics are, what the timeline is, wherever you are. And please don't think that another state's timeline is yours. Make sure that you're going to your state board of elections and knowing exactly where the ballot boxes are, knowing where your voting precinct is. I saw something out of Texas today. I think that they are having a ballot box per county. So hopefully that's not right. Hopefully that's inaccurate. Hopefully I'm seeing that CNN update incorrectly, because I hope that that's not the case, especially for a state that's that large with that many people. And so just know what's happening in your state, in your jurisdiction, but also, so I've seen a lot of timelines, they've been changing also. And so make sure that you have the most up-to-date information.
Yep.
And Stacy, you want to chime in on that as well?
Sure. So I'm going to speak to GOTV from a technical point of view. I've worked on a couple of campaigns, and GOTV, Get Out the Vote, is just that. GOTV is normally driven by political campaigns or PACs, also known as political action committees. And what they generally do is mobilize like-minded people, right, who are registered, to Yvonne's point, and get them out to the polls. And how they do that is through a number of ways. One, a text message, right, informing the voter of when your polls are open, some of the candidate issues, some of the issues that are important to a particular PAC. Others do like direct mail, where you'll receive a flyer from a PAC or a candidate. Other ways, calls. Sometimes you'll receive a call from a campaign or a political PAC. encouraging people to go out to vote. I think overall the point is to educate the voter and get them motivated to go out to the polls. If we have a little time, I'd like to share a quick story. Maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, there was a candidate running for a particular position, and she was a sister, right? And the campaign started to get really dirty. And the Black women in New York City, Lainey, let me tell you, we started mobilizing, right? It was text 10 or 15 of your friends to get them out to vote for this candidate. And it became a groundswell where this candidate was behind in the numbers. She ultimately became Attorney General of the state of New York. And so that type of mobilization is what GOTV is about.
Yeah. And that story really drives home how people can work together and move a campaign forward.
Absolutely.
So I really don't want to stop there. I want to turn to Kendra for a moment, though, to talk a little bit about some of these Black organizations, because we talk about like-minded individuals that come together. And so I want to talk about some of the strategies and tips that we've seen, or campaigns that we've seen from coming out of Black organizations. It could be sororities or fraternities, civic organizations, organizations such as the National Hampton Alumni Association, when we talk about alumni associations for the number of HBCUs or for majority schools and their Black focused organizations. So Kendra, I'm going to start with you on that question.
Sure, and thank you for that. Within Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which I can share from that perspective, they have AKA's LEAD, and that is the overarching platform that is being utilized to ensure that individuals are educated about the voting process. I'm the president of my chapter, and we just finished a series of 3 panels where we are ensuring that we are educating our community. Our first conversation dealt with starting young, starting local, being civically engaged. Next, we spoke about ensuring that our voices were heard. And lastly, just this week, we had a conversation about combating voter suppression. We partnered with Baltimore Black Girls Vote, just ensuring that we were having folks who were a part of the community and had a lot of community leaders who were a part of that conversation. And so those are the types of efforts that are happening in locales across the nation, where there are roundtable discussions. I know that the DMV Links had a conversation, just last night. Attorney General Eric Holder, he was a part of that. The former mayor of Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, she was a part of that. It's just things like this where there are collaborations with lots of different people from a lot of places that have similar, ideologies and share the same values and want to ensure that the historical context of why we are voting, why we value our vote is brought forward. But I think that part of what we have to see is that there are so many commonalities and things that we have to fight for. So we have to understand why our vote is valuable. So those are some of the ways that I know.
And Stacy, did you want to chime in on that?
Sure. So I know Kamala is an AKA sister. She's also a Link sister, so I have to shout that out as well.
Yeah.
To Kendra's point, recently there was a conference call with the Divine Nine and the Links and other women's organizations, moderated by Oprah Winfrey. And the conversation was GOTV. How do we get folks out to vote, right? And I think particularly in this election, Black organizations are critically important. Mobilization of HBCUs are also critically important. Just by nature, Black folks, we, right, work as coalitions, right? We're coalition builders. And so I think the more we work together on mobilization, getting the vote out, the better result we will see. And, to be very honest, like, let's recognize the power that we have as organizations, as individuals, and individually. So, I'm a strong believer of coalition building. And I think, our organizations, CBOs, fraternities, sororities, they're a critical component of all that.
And Stacy, while you're talking, I just want to see if you could also answer the question about why it's important to check your voter registration status and to be prepared when you prepare to vote.
It's critically important. We're living, unfortunately, in a day and age where, people fall off the voter, the voter rolls, right? And so you don't want to be that person where you think you're registered and you show up at the poll and you're denied access, the right to vote, right? And so it's critically important that folks, before election day, check to see if they are currently on the voter rolls and if they're registered. It's easy. It's extremely accessible. You can check online. If you just Google, am I registered? There are a number of organizations like Rock the Vote that will come up where you can check to see if you are still an eligible voter. The U.S. government also has a portal where you can check to see whether or not if you're still registered. Color of Change, a number of great groups allow you to check your voter status. The other option is you can go to your local board of elections to see if you're still registered. So I implore that everyone check to see if they are still considered a registered voter, right? As I prepped for tonight's call, I said, you know what, let me check to see if I'm a registered voter, right? So I encourage everyone to do that. It's critically important, particularly for this election.
And I'm going to stop there to see if Yvonne has anything that she wants to add before we move to the next topic.
No, I think Stacy and Kendra pretty much have covered, all the great things about mobilization. I guess if I had to add one thing, I go in terms of the coalition building. It is so important to bring people from different economic status across the board because all of us have influence in different ways. And so, whereas I may be able to bring out some people to vote and listen to me, depending on your local community in which you live, it's important to build those coalitions because you're trying to get everybody out, and not just people who are in your bracket or who are your neighbors. And indeed, it's the biblical thing is who is my neighbor, and so when you start to think about that, you definitely want to bring in as much of a diverse coalition as you can, because that will allow you to be able to reach so many more different types of people. Depending on who you're talking to, that has a lot to do with who has the most influence. So I would just like to add that as people are trying to build those coalitions, don't just look just at your own individual friends. Think about what other organizations are in your community that you can form together and band with that can help you do that.
Okay. And so, after you check your status to make sure you're registered and, you think about coalition building, another very important topic that we want to talk about is voter suppression. It might not look the same way that it might have looked in the 1950s or the 1960s, but it's something that we should be aware of. And so I'm going to turn to Kendra now to talk about some of the modern day tactics for voter suppression that we should be on the lookout for.
Sure, thank you, Lani. So voter suppression is any effort that's either legal or illegal by way of laws, administrative laws, or tactics that prevent eligible voters from either registering or actually voting, right? And so how this is playing out now, there's misinformation that is out there that, for those who are not aware, has specifically targeted Black communities. This is something that has been well documented. There have been Senate reports about it. There have been hearings, that have taken place. There are also state leaders presently across this nation who are trying to modify and limit access to early voting, even now, right? So this is still happening. In North Carolina, you had a case there where the state legislature, how they drew the maps of one party, who I shall not name, one party said on the record that they intentionally drew the maps how they did so that they could have a political advantage. They said that on the record, one of the state legislature members, and he said that he would have done it more if he could have, if he could have gotten away with it. And so again, that's not a hyperbole, that's what he actually said on the record. So these are things that are happening to this day, and they're happening across our nation. And everyone has to understand it's happening because your vote is your voice. People know that your vote matters. And so you have to understand that as well. And so I think that those are some of the examples of how voter suppression is continuing to this day.
Okay. And before we move forward, I just want to remind those that are watching on YouTube that you can post questions in the chat, and we will try to monitor that in order to get the questions to our panelists and our speakers tonight.
I just want to add to what Kendra just mentioned. I mean, listen, a perfect example is Stacey Abrams and her campaign, right? That's a clear example of voter suppression where, what was it, like an egregious amount of people were no longer on the voter rolls, right? And so, how does that happen, right? And you have to start to think, I hate to say this, reactively, right? And the way to do that is, again, by checking your registration, making sure you're on the voter rolls, putting together a plan, right? Just to ensure that some of this stuff doesn't happen.
And if I could add to that, Lani, additionally, when Kendra spoke earlier about which we hope is bad information, that there's just one polling place in one county in the state of Texas. That is a form of voter suppression. When you put up roadblocks to make it difficult for people to cast their votes, or you, in the name of COVID, go from 150 polling places down to 5. You think about all those people, you're hoping that they won't stand in line, and make it such that people got to stand in line for 12 hours. That's all a part of people trying to suppress the vote. And you have to be more determined, that's the reason the whole idea is this is a season of voting. And if we don't get anything else across tonight, it is plan your vote. Plan how you're going to vote. If you're going to vote that day of, pack your bags. Know that already know what you're going to be dealing with, because those are definitely modern day suppression.
That's right.
Okay. Now we do have one question in the chat from a viewer in Philadelphia, and their question is: will the president's lawsuit against the city, is there a possibility that it could impact their voting day there?
Well, I guess, and related to that, everything is fluid. As Kendra mentioned earlier, there are lawsuits constantly changing. So the best thing that you can do is definitely check your local, check your your Secretary of State's website in every state. In every state, the Secretary of the State is the state elections manager. And if you check their website, you will be able to get the most up to date for your state up until the day you go to vote. If you're still unsure about what's happening, I appreciate all the national sites, but make sure that you just check your Secretary of State's website. So I would encourage the person who asked the question the answer that is yes, it probably could, depending on how the outcome goes. But to make sure that is you just go to the Pennsylvania Secretary of State's website, and they're going to have the most up-to-date information for you. And what can happen if you've never done one of those sites, you go in, you plug in your county or your district, and it gives you that particular stuff for you. You as your voter, it'll give you down to your district and where you're supposed to vote. So it drives all the way down from the state all the way down to you as an individual when you go. And most of those national links take you to your Secretary of State's website as well.
And I want to add in something. I'll just say that there has been an overall attack, and everybody may not agree with me. There has been an overall attack on the integrity of our election process in our nation, right?
Yes.
The overall integrity. And so that is highly problematic. And I think that what that does, it undermines how folks feel about knowing that the outcome is a just outcome or is the right, outcome. And I think that that is one of the saddest things that I have seen since I have been alive, right, is just the attack on the integrity, and so I will say that don't let that dissuade you. Don't let that cause you to stay at home. Don't ever think that, I'm not going to go because, my vote may not be counted, or, I heard someone say that I can try to vote twice. Please don't do that, right? Please know that there are things turning that are trying to bring down the integrity of our entire system. And so know that your vote matters, like I said at the beginning, and know that attacks would not come if it didn't matter. So I just had to kind of add that.
And I have one recommendation for those that are on the line listening to us today. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they are actively monitoring any voter suppression throughout the country. And they have key attorneys on the ground in key states. So if there are issues that are a little alarming to you or you have questions, I encourage folks to contact the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And, they are pretty responsive. And, I wouldn't let voter suppression deter you from voting. I would just say be mindful and watchful about what's going on around you.
So let's get to a few real life examples. For
Okay.
the folks that are planning to actually stand in line and vote in person on election day, let's help them put together a plan for that, because we know that's going to take a certain amount of resilience and strength.
Yes.
So let's first answer the question about what happens if they get to the polling place and they find out that day that their name has been purged from the roll. What should they do?
I can take that one.
Okay,
I guess I want again to stress what Stacy said earlier. The way, first of all, we want to definitely encourage them to check for we even get there. But we get there that day, they can cast what's called a provisional ballot. They can say, yes, I am a registered voter. And so they can challenge. Don't go home mad saying that the people told me I wasn't supposed to vote. If you're in a state like Alabama, you got to have ID. Have your ID, have all those things that they're telling you. That's a form of voter suppression as well, having you to have all these different type of IDs. So already know the ID that you need to go and vote, okay? When you go vote and they tell you, we're sorry, your name is not on our list. You know that you've been voting at this polling place for the last 15 years and nothing has changed. You can do what's called a challenge ballot or a provisional ballot. What that would do is you insist that you have a right to vote. And the poll worker should afford you with what they call a provisional ballot. That ballot allows you to vote. And what they would do is after the polls close, when they get ready to count all those votes, they're then going to check and see were you correct, were you supposed to vote. And if your name was valid and you were a registered voter, but somehow your name got left off the list or what happened, then there's a day when you go in and you take your ID and they count your vote. Okay, so you can vote that day. Don't go home. The thing is, you want to do what they call a provisional ballot or a challenge ballot. And that's pretty much nationwide. You can cast that ballot. It won't be counted that day, but after all the ballots are counted and they get ready to go check. A lot of times you have, going back to what Kendra mentioned earlier, not Kendra, Stacy mentioned about the double voting and whatnot. People something the president was saying about voting absentee and then going to the polls and voting again. That is illegal. But if you did that, let's say you did cast your absentee ballot and you didn't put it in the mail until that day before, you're not sure if it got there. You could go to the polls that next day because your name, it may not show up. Most of the time, once you cast your absentee ballot, it's going to show up that you cast an absentee ballot already or you've already voted. If you're doing early voting, your name is going to have voted by on the day of the election, okay? So, but if some reason you want to challenge that, then you can do the same thing. It's called a provisional ballot or a challenge ballot.
Okay. And there's a question in the chat about whether when we go to the polls on the day of, or, even if there's early voting, should we have any concern about the poll workers or the poll watchers?
Well, there are two different things. There are poll workers and then there's poll watchers. Let's get those corrected.
Mm-hmm.
The poll worker is the person there who is actually could be a volunteer like me. I volunteered this year to be a poll worker. So I've got to go to a training, and they're actually, every state is looking for poll workers that look like us. So if you can take off and you have leave at your job, most jobs will let you take off to be a poll worker. In fact, the NAACP and many other organizations are looking for lawyers and other professional people to be poll workers, meaning you go get the training, you're there on site, and a poll worker can help put down some of this voter suppression. If you're there, you're able to assist with calming some of those things. The poll watcher, on the other hand, is actually the person who is a volunteer. The poll worker might get some type of stipend, okay, from the state or the local government for working that day. Okay, and they're the ones who take your ballot, help you with your ballot, and doing those things. The poll watcher is sitting there watching on behalf of a candidate or a party or a political party. And those people they are not supposed to say anything to you. They can just sit there. Every candidate, pretty much, I know in Alabama, I don't know about other places, but in Alabama, every candidate on the ballot has a right to have a poll watcher inside the poll, okay? And every political party has a right to have a poll watcher in every polling station, okay? But that's two different things. But the watcher is just there. They should be sitting over to the corner. They're probably watching. They should not be doing anything intimidating, anything that should be happening. And if that is happening to you inside of the polling place, that is when you go tell the poll worker what is happening. And then they can assist from that point.
Okay. Do you want to add something, Stacy, to that point?
To that point, to Yvonne's point, in New York State, I know we also encourage attorneys to volunteer their time as poll workers. Generally, and I, like Yvonne, I also volunteered as a poll worker during a couple of elections, and there are generally one or two attorneys on site. So if you feel that your vote is being suppressed, identify a poll worker, and more than likely one or two of those poll workers on site are also attorneys. And again, I reiterate, call the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. There's normally someone on site. And then in New York State, the Board of Elections, we have a committee of attorneys that are available to answer calls from 5 a.m. in the morning till 9 p.m. at night. So there are a team of attorneys that are really on top of voter suppression, particularly during this election year.
And Lena, also let me add, there's also, in addition to the NAACP, there's a national called Election Protection Hotline that you can report anything to.
That's right.
And it's just that 866 Our Vote, OURVOTE, is the National Election Hotline. You can also call your Secretary of State's office. Worst case scenario, I know that as African Americans, we're reluctant to call the police, but if there's major intimidation going on, indeed, you want to alert the poll workers because they can call 911 to get police out there. I think that was something recently happening. Was it in Pennsylvania just the other day during early voting? There was some voter intimidation going on as the people were going in to try to vote, and they reported it to the poll worker, and they called the police. and
Yeah.
those people had to leave because that's illegal. That is illegal. I think that's what we need to understand is voter intimidation is illegal. You know, we need to understand that as we are arming ourselves to go to the polls, is being knowledgeable, not just knowing that who I'm going to go vote for, but also know your rights. You know,
Right.
that you have a right not to be intimidated. You know, you have a right to report these things and not just let it happen.
And one other suggestion, Yvonne, if you feel as though you are being intimidated, you need to document the facts, right? So try to identify the individual that's doing the intimidation, right? The time, the date, the location, as much detail as possible is helpful.
Yes, and definitely make a report. Make
Right.
a report. You know, do not leave. Like I said, they are there. The poll workers are there to assist you. They're there to assist you, and they're not helping you. Go through those other steps we just talked about. Make a phone call to the Secretary of State's office. You can call the Alabama Attorney General. I mean, not Alabama, but call your state Attorney General's office. All of them, you're gonna have hotlines popping up everywhere.
Everywhere.
So
Yes.
when you go to the polls that day, write the hotline number down for you, so you
Right.
have it ready, and you won't have to be worried about trying to find it. Write it down, take it with you, right along with your ID.
Save it in your cell phone. That's what I'm
Save it
hearing.
in your cell
Have it
phone.
saved
Save
in
it
your
in your cell phone.
And you
That's
could
right.
have the Lawyers Committee, you could have the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, you
Anybody.
can have a
Absolutely.
plethora of numbers if you don't give you
Absolutely.
one at first call, and you could have a backup so that you can
Absolutely.
definitely try to get someone on the phone
Yes.
Absolutely. Attorneys will drop out of the air
to
Yeah.
come and assist you, right?
to come and assist you.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
it's and you know it's amazing this year. So many places. I was surprised even in Alabama at issues that we have here, but there's been a big push by our state bar statewide to get attorneys to be poll workers, to volunteer, to be
Yeah.
on site to assist wherever. And I did a 2-hour CLE yesterday on election laws in Alabama. You know, just so you know what's going on, if you're going to assist and how to and how to help.
And how to help. I need to sign up, Yvonne. I'll do that tomorrow.
Yes.
So, we talked a little bit about the benefits of being a poll worker, and that's the person inside that has taken the training offered by the board and that they are there to assist you. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Is that something is it too late to sign up for that? Do you think there are areas where people could still be helpful and useful?
Yes, I would say yes. I would again go to your state Secretary of State's website. Many of them have not even started the trainings yet. They do,
Right.
So it's not too late to sign up. What you generally, depending on what state you're in, you do have to, of course, be a registered voter or definitely live within the district that you're trying to be a poll worker in most states. But every state has different requirements. And most of the time, the application is online. It was online for me. I just filled it out, sent it to the people who it said to send to. I got an email. I don't know those people from whatever, but I got an email back and said, yes, we will accept you. Let us know if you're available for the training on October 22nd. You know, so they are in need of people because most of the people, you think about it, when you've gone to vote, most of the people are older people. With
Yeah.
COVID, they have
That's
so
right.
many more people. Now, let me go back to about voter suppression. We talk about them closing down polling places. If you don't have enough workers, you got to
Right.
have enough people to help run the machines.
That's
So,
right.
and that's why the all these in the NBA, National Bar Association, NAACP, all these people are trying to get people to be poll workers
Yeah.
so that they will have no excuse to say that we don't have enough people to work. You have so many people that are older in the with COVID, just are simply not going to work this year. They're not going to work. So if you don't have enough poll workers, if you needed 10 people to run a polling station, and you only have 5, then you're going to have to close that polling station
You
and
have to close
combine.
it. Yeah.
So that's kind of what's happening. So we want to continue to have our number of polling places that we're used to. We need to get off the sidelines, get in there. You know, I would admit that I've been a person sitting on the sidelines, in and out. This year, I said I'm all in. You know, I've
Well,
already
Yvonne, to
taken my
that point,
be off work and I'm gone. You know,
I just want
because
to say to that point, That's the type of thing that you don't want to wake up on the day after the election and say, what more could I have done?
Exactly.
You don't want to have that feeling. If you feel that you have even a slight passion or a slight urge to help, then find a way to get involved.
And it's so simple. I mean, everybody at the polling place doesn't have to be an attorney. You have people, all they're doing is checking an ID,
Right.
handing out a ballot. All those people play an integral part in you casting your vote. But if you don't have enough people in the process to have a polling place open for 12 hours, how many hours it got to be open, then you're going to have less polling places.
Yeah.
You're going to feel like your vote is being suppressed.
Yep.
Some of it might be intentional, some of it might be incidental, because we didn't step up and do our part to make sure that we could help.
And I know in New York, a poll worker actually gets paid. I'm not sure in other states.
Alabama gets paid too.
Yeah.
Alabama gets paid for that day.
Right.
So there's a question in the chat, and I wanted to bring Kendra in on this discussion to help us answer it. The question is, what can those that can't vote for, a number of reasons, whether it be citizenship, they are a felon or what have you, what can they do to be involved in this moment? How can they mobilize?
Yes, that's an awesome question. I think that what they can do is ensure that those that they know really understand the voting process and really know who it is that they're voting for, knowing what the ballot looks like, right? Those are going to be online, so you're going to be able to see what the ballot is going to look like. And just having those conversations with those who are in your network, I call it being vote ready, right? So just ensuring that everyone that is vote ready and understands the conversations and things happening within your community. There are so many roundtable discussions. There's so many events such as this, where we're talking about what it means to have a plan to vote, to really understand that it is a season of voting and not just, one day. And so I think that for those in those categories, those are some of the ways that they can still be a part, of this process. We all live under the laws that are set forward by those who are elected to office, right? So we all have a part to play.
There used to be a time we used to talk about driving people to the polls, souls to the polls, and things of that nature, or checking on your auntie or your grandmother or your grandfather, or made sure that they had a plan. So I definitely think there's some work for everyone here.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
Let me also add what some of the people are doing in terms of when we talk about get out the vote. One of the local organizations in this area, they're asking people to adopt a polling station. In other words, that you would check on that polling station that day as an organization. You adopt the polling station, you make sure people need water, that they need what they need to stay in line, to vote. Once they get there, let's say there's a long line. You don't want people to leave. They need water. You may have a chair. You just kind of checking the polling station to see if people need anything they need to help them that day, so they don't get out of line, so that they're willing to stand there and vote.
So Lani, talk a little bit, Stacy, you can answer this question and then go into your next point if you don't mind.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I know you're ready. So talk to me a little bit about the significance of being in line before the polls close and not leaving.
Woo.
Talk to me about
that. Listen, I recall when Obama ran for president, right? And people stayed on that line until they cast their vote, right? Every election should be like the Obama election.
Yes.
Right? Your vote is critical, whether you're voting for the first African-American president of the United States or you're voting against another candidate who is not just in your best interest, or for a city elected official. So, don't leave, stay on that line, cast your ballot, because it is your power, right? And as soon as you walk away, you give up your power to someone else, right? So it's critical that people stay on the line, wear comfortable shoes, bring a little snack with you, Put your playlist together, meet friends with the person in front of you, behind you, just so you stay motivated to stay on that line and vote. I think it's critically important. And then I'm just going to go back really quickly about the conversation around, those that may have criminal records. Don't assume that you can't vote, right?
Absolutely right.
Educate yourself about the laws in your state. Educate other people within your community and network. I think it's up to us to educate those who think they can't vote, right? What the laws actually are, because that is also a form of suppression, right?
Mm.
So, I think, again, I'm going to continue to say this: education, right? And execution. Educate yourself and execute. Critically important things.
Lani, if I could just add one thing to what Stacy just said. Yes. When you asked about line, you need to know when your polling stations open.
Absolutely.
And when they close. Because depending on where you are, if you're not in line when the polls close, you're not in line. That don't mean you can't be getting there. The poll closed at 7, then you can't be showing up at 8. You got, and if you're in line at 8 o'clock and still hadn't voted, that's fine, because you were there at 7 to vote. And they should allow you to vote if you're in place when the poll closes.
Yep.
And what you'll find that most places are going to shut the line down at that time. They're going to open at a certain time and they're going to close at a certain time. And I've seen where they go, the poll person go to that person when the time stops. It's kind of like, you know how they do in Walmart, a long line. They tell you, after this person, I'm not seeing anybody else. It's the same thing here. They're gonna be like, after this person, we close.
That's it.
Yvonne,
I don't let that happen to me, Yvonne.
You don't want to be the person showing up at 7:30 and the poll closed at 7, but the line is still out the door.
That's right.
Folks still standing there, but they're not gonna let you get in line.
Yeah.
And legally, they will be right. And unless you just got a generous cashier that day who got a little more time, you may not be able to get there. So again, we go back to plan your vote, plan how you're going to get there, and make sure you get there and know your times, open and close, and be in line before it closes. You can be there to 12 midnight, but make sure you're there before they shut the line down.
Yeah. And for states that have it, early voting is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Vote early.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
We have a couple of good questions that are coming in through the chat.
Okay.
And so the first one is, if you're trying to get a family member to vote, but they aren't interested, or if they're not interested in voting, or maybe they've never voted before, can you all give us some examples of how you would sort of go about that conversation? How would you try to convince them to vote this time? So I'm going to start with Kendra on that.
I would convince them, and I'm going to add another category into that too. Because I've heard folks say, well, neither or no candidate that's on the ballot seems to really be aligned exactly with what I want them to be aligned with, right? I think that for the family members who are first-time voters or who aren't really motivated to vote, let them know that if they want to ensure that they are adding to someone who is going to be their voice in county government, on city council, in the state legislature, in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, if they want to be a part of that process, know that they have to actually vote, right? And if you look at some of the exit numbers from the last, general election, there were some very close numbers that came down to individual counties in some states, right? And so if you just look at it, if you disaggregate those numbers, I think that is one way to show that numbers do add up, right? And that you have to vote your own values or vote for the person who best aligns with the type of leadership that you want to see, right? With the issues that you want someone to advocate for. So that's how I would have the conversation, or I'd start the conversation.
Okay. So Stacy, I'm gonna ask you to answer the same question.
Listen, Kendra, she's a little more polished and kind-hearted than I am.
Come on, Kendra.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I mean, listen, I come from a family where not voting is just not an option, right? As soon as I could walk, my parents would take me into the polling booth, right? So I know that it is my civic duty. It's just ingrained in me, right, to vote every election, every single election. But hey, no judgment, right? Some people need to find their way and get back into the voting process. I would make it simple and plain. Listen, you see what happened in Kentucky, right? And the AG, right, is someone that has power, right? And if you care about what happens from just a basic level, law and order, it's important for you to vote, right?
Absolutely.
If you care about who should be the AG that
Yes.
decides if a police officer is tried for something or not, it's important for you to vote. So, I meet people where they are, right? And I think understanding what moves folks to get them to vote is important, and to start a conversation from there. The other thing is, a family intervention, right?
Right.
Family members and friends that vote, right? Sometimes you need to circle around that one individual so they can understand how critical it is to cast your ballot.
Yeah.
So those are the two recommendations.
I guess if I was going to add anything, it's related to what Stacy was just saying as well, is make it personal.
Yeah.
You got to figure out what drives people. If it's their children, if it's their education, whatever it is, to me, you have to make it personal. It's kind of like, the census. We've been dealing with the census. And of course,
Right.
that's still going on as the plug for the census. Please get your family members, make sure they are getting themselves counted. And trying to get people understanding why they even need to fill out a census so your child who gets free lunch, can continue getting their free lunch. Because
Right.
if you don't fill out the census, they're going to cut the money and you may not,
Right.
you're not going to get free lunch no more. The person who's going to help make sure that you get the other benefits you want, or to help who believes in, if you have a minimum wage job and you believe that you should be making more money, who is going to represent your interests? Well, that's not going to happen by osmosis. That comes from a vote.
That's
Whether
right.
it's at your local, state, or national level, that is driven by election. People who decide that are people who are elected, and you can only change that if you vote. So I think, like both Stacy and Kendra said, we meet people where they are. Make it personal. Have the conversation. Make it personal. And depending on who you're talking to, you don't have to be as polished. You just have to tell them like it is and move forward.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think is, go ahead, Ken.
That's a quote. The decisions don't happen by osmosis. Thank you for that, Yvonne.
That is a great quote. And the one thing I was going to say is, our strategies for talking to that family member, our tips, they might be a little different, but one thing we all agree on is what you have to have the conversation.
You got to have.
Absolutely.
So I think the words will find you when it's time.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So there's a different environment that we are operating in with this election. We're in the middle of a pandemic. So what are some strategies that you all have for reminding people to stay safe, or, making sure that, they don't forget the fact that we're in the midst of COVID-19? Anybody want to tackle that first?
That's a good question.
Tell me, as it relates to voting or just in general?
In general, about if you're going to stand in line, if you're going to be out there during early voting or the day of, Make
Well,
sure, that you prepare yourself and that you don't forget that we're in the middle of a pandemic.
yeah, well, I would say just take all your supplies with you. Some places I know here in Alabama, most of the states got COVID money to assist with voting, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them bought protective gear, those things. I know in Alabama, even though right now we're in a statewide mask mandate, they're not making it mandatory that you wear a mask to go into the polling place. Okay, so you need to be prepared for yourself. However, you think that you normally would prepare for that, then that's what you do. Let me also add right now, if you're majorly concerned about COVID issues, go on and vote early. Most places, when now there's not a long line. It's not going to be a lot of people. So you can use this season to plan when you're going to go vote. So rather than standing in line with another 1,000 people, right up on each other, you can actually go now and vote, or you can vote by mail or vote by absentee. There are a lot of ways in which you can vote in the middle of COVID and still stay safe. You can still stay safe. But if you're online that day, have your gloves if you feel like you need gloves. Have your sanitizer. Take your own pen. Just do all those things that you feel like you need to do for you to stay safe if you're going to go that day.
I agree. I agree with Yvonne. And I'll just add just a little bit more. And then I'm sure Kendra has like a Bible that she'll add to the conversation. Listen, we're all responsible adults, right? And when I go out, listen, I'm on it when it comes to my mask. I grab my mask and my hand sanitizer, and those are just the daily things I do now as part of my life, right? But when I walk down the street, I realize some people don't have masks for a number of reasons. It could be they just can't afford it, right? So here is where I put out a call to action to the Hampton Alumni Association. We as responsible adults who can afford masks, if you have the capacity to volunteer your time for maybe like an hour, go to a polling site with a handful of masks and hand them out to folks, right? I think we as an association need to figure out smart ways to keep people safe and engaged. And if we have the ability to volunteer our time as a poll worker or someone just outside giving masks to people, that helps the collective.
Good point.
I completely agree with what Stacy and Yvonne have said. I would also add, if you have children and, they have to come with you, plan accordingly for them as well. Maybe don't bring as many drinks with them that day so that they don't have to go to the restroom. My daughter is 5. She barely fits in her stroller, but we're going to have a stroller that day, right?
There you go.
And I'm going to pack everything in it that I need to have, snacks and everything. And so I just think that making that plan, having masks and having extra, I think that is definitely the way for you to go. Make sure that your battery is charged up. If you have an extra one, or if you have a little battery pack, take that with you. Because if you see something that you want to make a call to the election protection line, right, you're going to want to have enough battery so that you can do that. So those are some of the things that I would say, but especially for those who have children, plan accordingly for them as well. So,
Yep. And then I'll add one more thing. I know here in New York, myself and some Hampton alum, we are trying to mobilize to pick up ballots from seniors so they don't have to go to the polls, right? So again, innovative ways to keep people safe and also exercise their right to vote.
You all have kind of led into the next question that we received from the chat.
Okay.
This person indicated that they've always voted the day of the election and in person, and they've never had a problem. However, many people are now advocating for voting early, or absentee ballots or mail-in ballots. So what is your advice on that? do you encourage people to take part in those initiatives for the early voting?
Well, I do. I think
Yeah,
that
me too.
pretty much every Secretary of State, despite the rhetoric that we hear spouting out there about absentee voting or other types of voting, that all those voting are safe ways in which to cast your vote. But there are some cautionary measures that we need to make sure that people remember. If you're going to vote by mail, I don't care if we call it absentee or however you want to call it, it all ends up being the same thing. Make sure you follow the steps, and you got to make sure, when you go to the polling place, I know in Alabama you have to put a copy of your ID in there. If it says ID copy, make sure you put one in there. One of the biggest things that's key is, and I asked this, one of the members is, I'm also a part of the illustrious Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and one of the sorority members is the circuit clerk, and she pointed out one of the things that you want to make sure is that your signature matches what is on your ID. Okay,
Yes.
that's key. So if your signature is John A. Smith, you need to sign John A. Smith,
Yeah.
because those are the signatures that they're comparing. They're not comparing some obscure signature that they've never seen. They're not going back in the files. They're looking at what you sent. So just be consistent. Also, make sure that whatever reason in Alabama, you have to set forth the reason why you can't show up that day on the poll. They've got a universal COVID thing this year, but whatever you marked as your reason, okay, when you fill out your ballot, you got to mark it again. Make sure that matches. If you said I can't vote because I'm going to be out of the country, you still need to be out of the country. You don't need to all of a sudden say, oh, well, maybe I'm going to be sick. No, you need to be consistent. Know what you said. One of the other biggest thing is that if you're going to vote absentee or mail-in, make sure your affidavit. All these places are affidavits. Why? Because they want to make sure you are saying that who you are. The person is signing, saying that you signed the paper. So some places require 2 signatures. Some of them require you have it notarized. So it doesn't matter who you get the 2 signatures, but have the 2 signatures. Don't send it in without the 2 signatures. How much does it take for it to get there? Depending on how thick your ballot is, it may take 5 stamps, not 2. So you need to make sure you know all of those things. So that goes back to our whole concept we've been talking about tonight, is plan your vote. If you're going to plan to vote absentee, know what it's going to take for you to vote absentee. How many steps do I need? All of those things. Don't forget that a lot of states like Alabama this year got constitutional amendments on their ballots. Take time to vote on those. If you're going to go to the polls, read them before you go, so you can be quickly, and you won't spend all day in there. So and after you cast that vote, you follow all those steps. You can track your absentee ballots. So you're wondering, well, okay, I voted absentee, I did all those things, I dropped it in the drop box, or I put it in the mail. How do I know if the Secretary of State's office got it? Well, in the United States, 45 states, including the District of Columbia, have where you can track your vote just like you track a package. Every vote, every absentee ballot is given a unique identifier. So you can track it. So you know what you did. I suggest you take a picture of your ballot before you drop it in the
Yeah.
mail. So now
Yes.
you know what your number is. Your
Yes.
number is on that ballot. How do I track it? Every state except, here we go, let's do the roll call of the states that don't have it. Connecticut, Mississippi, Missouri, Texas, and Illinois. That means if you live in all the other 45 states, you can track your ballot. You can track your absentee ballot. All you do is go to your Secretary of State website, click on there, track my ballot. There you go. Plug in your number, kind of like you would search your UPS or your Amazon tracking label, and track it. And you can track and find out what it is. So you can track your ballot. You can go out there and it'll tell you ballot received. Okay? So, there are safety measures that pretty much every Secretary of State has gone to make sure that you know that you can vote safely and that the absentee or mail-in ballots are available, and you should utilize them if there is definitely is a very viable way for you to vote.
Anything to add, Stacy or Kendra?
Everything that Yvonne said.
Absolutely, I concur. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point about making sure you track your ballot. If you are going to vote early and you're going to send it in, track it, take a picture of it, and make sure that you know that it was received and that you've been counted. So that's definitely a good tip for making folks feel a little bit more comfortable about voting early through these measures and these means that we've discussed. So now I want to get to a topic of what happens on election night. Are we going to know the winner of the election when we go to bed, Stacy?
I don't know. Lani, I've been toiling that question around in my head for 2 days ever since you sent the questions. I hate to say it, I don't think so. I don't think we'll know election night. Others may disagree.
Well, let's have a dialogue. Let's have a discussion. Lay out
I don't disagree at all. I don't disagree.
Well, we want people to have some expectations.
Listen, I think it's okay that we don't know, because I think, again, it's a season of voting, and I think the key here is understanding that what was happening is they said already this morning on the news, 2 million people have already voted. 2 million. 2 million people have already voted. That is 10 times the number that voted in 2016.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And every state counts their absentee or mail-in ballots differently.
Yeah.
Some states, like Alabama, don't count theirs until the day of. They can't even open them. I think, and they can open them and have them ready, but they can't do nothing else with them, until that day. They've gotten extra machines ready. They've hired extra people to come in to help with the process, but we're still not going to know. Okay. Yeah. They can't start counting until 12 noon on election day. So imagine if they're getting thousands of ballots in, but that don't mean that they won't be counted. So I think that we've been so used to everybody going to the polls and voting that day. So now you get the instant vote. So many of us are voting early. So knowing that, and did you know, and I found out something as I've been getting prepared for this and in this all enthralled voting season, becoming more knowledgeable myself, is that usually the final vote is never confirmed until that Friday after the election day. So we've always assumed, notice they always say the projected winner. Notice they always say the projected winner, because they still got to count absentee ballots. It's just this year they got a lot of absentee ballots they got to count. So counting absentee ballots after the day of the election is not unusual. They've always done it that way. Yeah. And they don't certify the vote until that Friday after the voting day. This is nothing new. We just never knew about it because everybody usually vote on that day. So I say, don't worry about it. Just wait until what they say is not good until the fat lady sings or whatever. Well, I don't know. Hey,
Yvonne,
we're gonna wait it out.
I don't know, Yvonne.
Expectations here. We're giving people a flavor of what they should look for and expect on election night.
They should have patience. They should have patience. They should know.
My nerves, Yvonne. My nerves.
I am encouraged that you got that many people 2 million people have already voted. Come on now. So you think about it. If that many people have already voted, I mean, and a whole lot gonna show up on the day of just because we don't trust the mail. Okay. Right. Some of us gonna be willing to stand in line because we don't trust the mail. So I know the vote is gonna be so overwhelming that we're gonna be able to decide that night, but if we don't get scared. Yeah. Don't let people tell you otherwise. Know that every vote has not been counted at that time. Yeah.
I'm gonna pull Kendra into the conversation really quickly. I think you're right, Yvonne. Unless the vote is overwhelmingly the other candidate, and I have to get used to not saying his name, right? I don't think they're going to call it that night,
No,
right?
not.
Unless, again, if it's overwhelmingly on the blue side, right?
Hey, call
Then
it.
they may call it, right? Then they may call it. But it's going to take time for the absentee ballots to be counted. And then also, listen, we still have someone in office who has said he is prepared to contest the results, right? So I don't think this is going to be something that will be decided that night, even that week, right? It may take a couple of weeks, it may even take months, right? But it's going to be a long process. And I don't know,
Yeah.
my sister Kendra, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you all on that. I think that patience is a virtue, but it is not unforeseeable that the votes will not all be able to come in on that day. Some votes aren't even able to be counted. Some of the ballots aren't even able to be counted until that day. And what Stacy was just saying, I will just say that if there is any type of, contesting, potential contesting of the election, so we all know that
Yeah.
goes to the Supreme Court, right? And that would take time. And so I just don't want folks to preclude that, because I think that there have already been some hints that have been given.
So he has said it, sis.
Listen.
Okay, we're gonna bring it back now.
I know. All right.
One of the pillars of a functioning democracy is the smooth transition of power.
Yes.
And in elections, right? And for that not to happen in our nation would be traumatizing, right?
Yes.
For
Yes.
our nation. And so anything that has to do with presidential elections and voting, of course, has strict scrutiny. It goes right to the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. They have original jurisdiction in that matter. And so that's why you see this quick pace to get the nomination seated, right?
Absolutely.
Because you have 8 justices currently, and so that's why there is a strong push for that to happen. And so just know that it's not unforeseeable that the votes in the election will not be called that night, but also that if there's a challenge, it goes to the Supreme Court. That takes time. So this could be drawn out over some time. So just know that could happen, and it's actually likely. So
what's the prediction? I predict a few months.
It depends on what happens. It depends. It could take a few weeks. It could take a week. It could take a few months. If it goes to the Supreme Court, it's a longer process. But I definitely, I don't want people to count that out, because it is probable that could happen in the event the election is close, or people that in the last election, one person won the general vote, right?
That's right. That's
and
right.
The other won the Electoral College. And so just, a general understanding of civics.
Yes.
And you just know that this could be contentious. It already is, right? But it's going to be interesting. So,
okay.
I don't know.
We'll get to your prayer closets. We'll start there.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not even going down that pessimistic road with Kendra and Stacy. I'm gonna stay on the positive that the voting gonna be overwhelming by the time they get through with the Friday count. You're gonna know something. We not even gonna have to go to the Supreme Court. I'm gonna be positive. I do want I want them to know that I don't think we're gonna know a true number on that election day.
Yeah.
But I believe with 2 million votes already being cast, and we ain't even really started voting right now.
We're still in October.
That hey, it's just October. that it's gonna be decided by the end of that week. They might still need to bring some more machines to finish counting and something. But I trust and believe that we're gonna be able to decide this without going to the Supreme Court.
Listen, Yvonne, I said a few months so I can get people out to vote. That's the motivator.
Okay.
Right.
Yes. Ladies, this has been a lot of fun. I have thoroughly enjoyed hosting this panel with you as we talk about.
Lani, are you kicking us off? Is it over?
Is it over? My time flies when you're having fun.
That's right.
I'm getting to my closing remarks, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to have some closing remarks. The president has spoken. She indicated that it's over. So
yes, Ms. Pemberton.
We are coming to a close, and I sincerely want to thank you from the bottom of my heart of being a part of this panel, because I think it's very important for us to share information and to talk about these subjects so that no one is surprised, so that we all know how to proceed, how to vote, what we need to do. So with that being said, I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to say one or two things that you might wanted to have said, but you didn't get a chance to say. So we're going to start with Stacy, because she looks ready.
Listen, vote. You have to understand how important your vote is. Russia understands how important your vote is. The Republicans, the Democrats understand your power and exercise it. Vote.
Absolutely. And Kendra?
Have a plan. Ensure that you're planning for yourself, for your family, for your children. Just make sure that you have your mask. Take a few more for others. Pack a snack, but have your plan and get out there.
Yvonne?
Yes, and I would concur, and I would like to say that this is a voting season. So whatever your plan is, work your plan. Just make sure that you vote and make sure other people vote. Don't just think about you. This is when you need to check on your neighbors and make sure your neighbors have voted. And don't assume that everybody you interact with or in your family are registered voters. Ask them if they're registered. If they need some help, reach out. You're going to the polls. Ask them if they need a ride to the polls. Ask them if they need you to mail in to pay the postage for the absentee ballot. Make yourself a committee of one, but get involved at some level, whether you are going to help people that day, become a poll worker, a poll watcher. We need you. Thank you.
Thank you. And so again, thank you, ladies. And we're going to kick it back to our president, Gena Pemberton, for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Lani, Yvonne, Stacy, and Kendra. What a great conversation. I thought it was riveting. I learned a bunch. You all are fired up, ready to go. You got me fired up, ready to go. I like that Yvonne is being optimistic, but I'm going to ride on the pessimistic side with Kendra and Stacy. But I really appreciate you all taking the time. Lani, thank you so much for moderating. I couldn't be prouder of you as alumni, as Black women, and as leaders for taking the time today to be a part of this panel. And for everyone that's been watching, to my fellow alumni and guests, take heed to what their final words were. Vote, have a plan, and then also get others to vote as well. I love when Yvonne said, be a committee of one. So now, be that person that harasses people and asks them, are you voting? I don't care who you're voting for. I mean, we might care, but you know what I mean? But let's make sure people get out there and vote. And I think that we've each got to, each one has to take one, is almost what the plan should be. So thank you guys for taking this time. We are going to share this panel out on our Facebook page. If you haven't already, click below. Like our YouTube page and follow along. But thank you again to the ladies for joining. It felt like I was at my home by the sea, sitting around the kitchen, especially with Stacy and Yvonne acting so ridiculous. Thank you, Kendra, for being professional. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.